probably fine.
Are you good?
Yeah, that's gonna be fine.
All right. Anyone not ready?
Wait, I did
Who will ever relate the whole history of Narcotica? It is almost the history of culture, our so-called higher culture. As early as the year 2737 BC, Chinese Emperor Shinding mentioned the use of marijuana in his pharmacopoeia. The history of drug use is as long as the history of culture, mysticism, and ritual. The word drug itself is bound up in this history. Montero writes, drugs is both a word and a concept. A plant, root, or substance for us is also a thing, apprehended through the name of a concept, the device of an interpretation. No, in the case of drugs, the regime of the concept is different. There are no drugs in nature. There may be natural poisons, but there are not as such drugs. With this addiction, the concept of drugs supposes an instituted and institutional definition. A history is required, and a culture, conventions, evaluations, norms, an entire network of intertwined discourses, a rhetoric. The drug can be poison or remedy. The power of sorcery that lies in the fascination itself can make any remedy into poison. Derrida writes in Plato's Pharmacy. A fountain with curative powers was dedicated to pharmacia. Near the illicit, pharmakia is also a common noun signifying the administration of the pharmacon, the drug, the medicine, and or poison. Poisoning was not the least usual meaning of pharmacia. Socrates compares the written text Phaedrus was brought along to a drug. This pharmacon, both remedy and poison, already introduces itself in the body of discourse. Its power of fascination can be simultaneously beneficent or maleficent. The pharmacon will be a substance with occult virtues, cryptic depth, refusing to submit to analysis, anti-substance itself, which resists any philosophy, exceeding its bounds as non-essence, granting philosophy by the very fact of the inexhaustible adversity of what funds it and with the infinite abyss of what founds it. And the spellbinding fascination that accompanies this simultaneous presence and absence haunts the rhetoric of pharmacon and the pharmacon of rhetoric. David Applebaum writes, there is a moment in Shakespeare when Horatio addresses the ghost of Hamlet's father, the dead king. It is quite possible that Marcellus has anticipated the coming of the scholar of the future, a scholar who would dare to speak of the future, who would dare to speak of the phantom, claiming that this not only neither contradicts nor limits scholarship, but will in truth have conditioned it. And this phantom comes to us through writing and rhetoric. As Attius reminds us, it is this life of memory that pharmacon of writing would come to hypnotize, fascinating it, taking it out of itself by putting itself to sleep in a monument, letting itself get stoned by its own signs. It will sink down into the lake, overcome by non-knowledge and forgetfulness. For writing has no essence or value of its own. It plays within the simulacrum. It is the mind memory of knowledge or truth. The alteration of mood and mental state through the ingestion of chemicals has a history as old as human civilization. The pharmacon is pure simulacrum with no material essence, yet this is the basis of historical memory, of knowledge, of truth, and hence of material power. How do we study the history of a memory, the image of an image, the madness of the reefer? Montero writes in 2010. The only way to study truth is to examine the subjective rhetoric, the augmenting the aggregate of human relations. The rhetoric of those in power examine eclipses the rhetoric of the less powerful. It is appropriate to consider truth not solely in the sum of human relations, but the sum of human relations subjugated by systems of power. Those in control of media can be referred to as the dominant group holding the power to impart knowledge to the masses. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics needs to reach large audiences with their Trump rhetoric, shaping the foundation of American ideology regarding marijuana. Anslinger, the first commissioner of the FBI, Anslinger, masterminded a very efficient national campaign to determine public attitudes towards marijuana. He's probably the most important player in the history of both American and international narcotics law enforcement and legislation. Anslinger's radical assessments went unrestricted. In 1932, the Bureau's emphasis on the marijuana problem is evident. 2 years after the formation of the FBI, the effects of the Great Depression began to place economic pressure on the organization. Anslinger had to find a new target, a new drug business upon which to peg a budget increase. Anslinger directed his attack on marijuana, spreading grotesque anti-marijuana literature and reports. The FBI employed a rhetoric of power by observing the available means in which to persuade. Anslinger states that the insidious and insanity-producing marijuana has become among the worst of all narcotic veins, invading even the schoolhouses of the country, and the uniform state narcotic laws, the only legislation yet devised to deal effectively with this horrid menace. Anslinger's goal was to establish a subjective feeling within legislation attempting to objectively weigh marijuana. The Union Signal, a paper, transcribed Anslinger's approximation that 50% of the violent crimes committed in the districts occupied by Mexicans, Greeks, Turks, Filipinos, Spaniards, Latin Americans, and Negroes may be traced to the use of marijuana. They became bestial demon acts filled with a mad lust to kill. Anslinger's operation generated reefer madness. 2 weeks following the shocking propaganda campaign against the evil drug, Congress met to measure the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. Implementing a punitive tax would control social use, making marijuana unattainable by repressive taxation. Plato remains suspicious of all pharmacon in general, even in the case of drugs used exclusively for therapeutic ends. Wielded with good intentions, even when they are effective, the pharmacon can never be simply beneficial. Rather than studying the poison and remedy within each, the public tends to become exceedingly fearful of specific drugs while accommodating others. Specified discrimination is a result of the power of rhetoric. Anslinger's rhetoric facilitated the development of American society's view concerning marijuana. What we refer to as reality has been built up to us through nothing through our symbol system. Rhetoric, part of the symbol system, shapes each individual's reality. It's difficult to measure the extent of truth or falsity of rhetoric's source. Vulnerable to the system of power, rhetoric is shared social knowledge that can be manipulated in ways that motivate people to behave and act in one way as opposed to others. The FBI manipulated shared social knowledge to induce individuals to fear marijuana and to bestialize the use of rhetoric is not only persuasion but identification as a social cohesive force. In the first image, A white child sits dressed in a fine upper-class garment. You want that? A white child sits dressed in fine upper-class garments, lace, flowers, and a feather hat designate wealth in what turn-of-the-century white America considered to be high class. With pinky up, the child sips a glass saucer of Coca-Cola adult refreshment next to this vase of flowers and an ornate ad that displays the brand Coca-Cola. This image evokes both nostalgia for the old world values and appeals to an ideographic society that implicitly draws moral lines based on ethnicity and class status. In the second image, published by the FBN under Anslinger, a group of black demonic figures supporting horns are seen throwing children and women into a fire below a satanic statue of Moloch. These dope peddlers are cast as a dark menace to society, taking white scholars, women, and police officers away from the seemingly ordered society featured in the foreground. These propaganda images both evoke the ideograph of social order, a symbolic network of interwoven meaning shaped by the assumptions of turn-of-the-century America, while cocaine is advertised as a classy drug safe enough for the children. Marijuana is the assassin of youth, stealing productive members of society from normalcy and thrusting them into the so-called criminal depravity associated with the devil's drug. Our approach to history is to turn it into a battering ram, to topple the idols of truth and knowledge that weave themselves into the social fabric of rhetoric. Matthias 97. Conflation of truth and power is a key assumption in the postmodern thought and points usefully to the direction of historianist rhetorician. Knowledge is an exercise of power through the codification of power relations. At one point in time, it was common knowledge that dark-skinned people were inferior to light-skinned people. This knowledge had material effect in perpetuating power relationships. The kidnapping and enslavement of African blacks and the genocide of American natives were the material result of this knowledge. In this country, this one constant of the progress of human knowledge throughout history is the exercise of power as domination. Humanity does not gradually progress from combat to combat until it arrives at universal reciprocity where the rule of law finally replaces warfare. Humanity installs each of its violences in a system of rules that thus proceeds from domination to domination. The concept of history leads to genealogists to a practice of historical writing is discursive intervention. The rules of which domination is maintained are subverted through the seizure of the means of production, i.e. historical narrative, because all history is interpretation. The role of genealogy is record history, the history of morals, ideals, and metaphysical concepts. The genealogist approaches historical knowledge as the general approach to warfare. The success of history belongs to those who are capable of seizing the rules, who replace those who use them, and further, meaning redirect them against those who had initially imposed them. The interpretation is the violent appropriation of a system of rules in order to impose a new direction, to bend to a new rule, to force participation and different. The genealogist made thought into a machine of war, battering him into a nomadic force. Genealogy is not simply a matter of writing new histories to reflect the historian's stake in political struggles. The genealogist is dealing with the materials present in traditional histories, but she is specifically cognizant of her work as an interpretation, attempts to uncover the discourse of historical knowledge hide from themselves. The genealogist works within what is available, rereads the surface cultural activity, find meaning in the different forms which it seems to offer or approve. Genealogical redistribution serves fragments and not only demystifies the failing ideology of the system, but produces a new reading which is more convincing asymptotic approximation of the truth of the matter. The pharmacon is pure simulacrum with no material essence. This is the base of historical memory of knowledge of truth and its material power. The discursive formation surrounding the concept of drug abuse has been delimited and constructed to allow the individual subject to control over the chemistry of his or her body. These assumptions have become invisible assumptions. They become truths in Nietzsche's sense of illusions about which one has forgotten. This is what they are. The term drugs has been imbued. It is clear that when one mentions drug abuse, she is not talking about forcible injection of mental patients with neuroleptics such as chlorpheniramine or haloperidol. These are considered antipsychotic agents. If drug abuse does not refer to a patient's physical addiction to chemicals such as morphine or Valium, if prescribed in a hospital while a person addicted to heroin is clearly abusing drugs, a person addicted to methadone is just clearly seeking treatment to stop using drugs. The statement drugs are dangerous is ridiculous from a purely literal standpoint. A pound of arsenic is no more dangerous than a pound of lettuce. All substances are toxic to the human body at some dose level. Heroin, cocaine, marijuana pose no problems for those who do not take them. One should be leery of any foreign substance introduced in the body rather than developing a morbid fear of some substances and a blind tolerance of others. The power of this assumption drilled into American daily is increasingly populated television commercials and news stories, which lies in its ability to personify the inert substance and imbue it with agency. When drugs become the omnipotent demon with power to drag the unsuspecting victim into addiction, crime, and death, it becomes rational to wage war on the demon. The metaphor of a war on drugs is itself common to justify the massive use of the actual military force to combat the worldwide metaphysical threat, as in the case of the invasion of Panama or National Guard going to marijuana fields. Thus, the metaphor gathers material out of the issue of crime, and the threat of the social fabric is undoubtedly true. The prevalence of drug-related crime and drug violence is more than simply a textual concoction to origins, and the discursive formation drug use itself is crime. Ipso facto, drug users are criminals. By defining drug use as criminal activity, Satan ensures creation of an undergrad for addicts. The social statement of being institutionally defined as a criminal outside the bounds of ordinary society by physical conditions of his body further ensures that they are unlikely to function well in that society. The rhetorical foundation of labeling drug use as criminal shifts the locus of concern over drugs' behavior to personality. Only until approximately the last quarter of the 19th century, the use of drugs was portrayed in the public discourse as an activity some people engage in rather than doing something to define the personality of the user. The social definition of drug user is a different kind of person does not come to influence these good discourses until the end of the 19th century. It is meaningless in any materialist. Has anyone ever seen society fall apart?
What does the 1AC do?
The 1AC,
What's the method?
what did the 1AC do?
Yes.
The 1AC presented both a genealogy of the history of drug rhetoric in America as per the FBN and Henry Anslinger, as well as a rhetorical analysis of the visual rhetoric surrounding Anslinger's policies.
How do we interrogate rhetoric, or how does rhetoric, I guess, interrogating rhetoric change the way the world is shaped?
This would be our piece of Attai's evidence. It says that examining the rhetoric of the situation is necessary to unpack the ideographs, i.e. the term social order implies more than just the two words that are there. Our argument is that the component of visual rhetoric allows us to investigate the underlying assumptions of the rhetoric of, say, the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, or Henry Anslinger's testimony in front of Congress.
And then because of that, we say things that happened in the past that criminalize marijuana is bad, and we need to stop doing that?
No, our rhetorical analysis is good.
Your rhetorical analysis of that is good. Okay, how does rhetorical analysis shape the world as well?
It was the thing I just explained to you. It allows us to understand the ideographs that are constructed through rhetoric.
How do you determine, how does the 1AC determine truth, or what truth is?
Our argument was that we need to examine the historical tellings of truth to create a more asymptotic approximation of what that truth is.
Is history the only way in which we understand the world?
Obviously not.
Okay, I mean, is that the only method in which we interact with it in order to problem it?
What do you mean interact with it? Obviously you interact without thinking about history, but that history clearly still shapes the world that you act in.
Okay, that's fine. What's the impact from the 1AC?
We believe that the history of the prohibition of marijuana is rooted in a racist desire to project anxiety on.
And then after this, after our rhetorical criticism.
What do you mean after?
Like what?
We are engaging in a criticism of the rhetoric that exists in the status quo. That criticism is good because it creates a disruption of the truth narratives that exist.
How does that disrupt things like the system in which allows for?
How does it disrupt?
For example, marijuana is currently illegal as a result of the 1937 anti-marijuana tax legislation. Our argument is that we need to examine the foundations of such legislation as per the Henry Anslinger testimony that happened in Congress.
A few arguments about how marijuana constructed as sort of an evil sin in which is projected against black bodies. And then how, so is that claim that religion always creates, or is religion as in Christianity creates structures in which black bodies are then prosecuted?
It's not really a Christianity argument.
Okay, how, I guess?
It's more an argument about moralism. The way that,
why is moralism bad?
Well,
the piece of pharmacon evidence that we're reading is talking about the concept that all things are imbued with both good and negative aspects to them. The way rhetoric shapes drug use is it wants to polemicize and say some drugs are exclusively good, i.e. prescribed drugs, and some drugs are exclusively bad.
Individuals make evaluations, but part of the point that the Attai's evidence is making is that those evaluations can't be separated from the historical rhetoric that shapes the policies that exist now.
Alright, so we want to create...
I would prefer...
Yeah, one of our computers doesn't connect. I don't know. You want this last piece of it? Page.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll leave this up. That's cool.
If you could email it to me, that would be good. Okay, sweet. Afterwards. I mean, yeah, afterwards. Or something. I don't know. I won't look into it. I don't know. How does email change usually work?
Some people will like follow along, but usually if like there is an email chain, it's easier to seek it out at the beginning.
It's just ben.crossen@gmail.com.
I'm just going to shoot this to you real quick.
Orders 1 and then case 10.
it's gonna take me a second to.
For sure.
So, or yeah, you don't have to. We'll just put that on. All set?
Yeah.
Cool.
First off, to critique the separation of God as the poles that led to the time of failed conditions and need for God has been replaced by supposedly enlightened self-legislation postmodern. Secularists practice form of self-mutilation by denying that, which is present alongside in the refusal beyond our imminent social order is a violent denial that takes being toward death as the only authentic future we may have one. And that day when we live in a time of failed contradiction or conditions, they attempt to live in between to celebrate the ambiguity of the new social horizon along. And always, however, bringing diversity into accord with their own projections, they argue that since overcoming metaphysics about language and the danger of presence, since God is committed to the present, they assume that theology is no longer an option sustainable by serious minds blind over in such a world where they've been unable to disengage themselves from whatever transcendental schema. They wish to endorse their secular minds only have a beginning to perceive that all is not, should be the self-liberation to limitation mind after all the forms of self-mutilation Emerson Khan. Dismiss God from the human cognition, human beings have no reason for God. See no reason for God every day since the contemporary police having some new subjectivities are claimed, and it has excluded in fresh litigations being imitated on their behalf. The PS that speak righteously about each other, about how they are keeping faith in the world, about the need to vigilant against the illegitimacy of hierarchies. We are told that there can be no discrimination in a secular city. Either they seek a panel of eminence or they do not accept the necessity of the transcendental methodology. The former too convinced of the hopelessness of their position to deduce themselves into avid, powerless creatures celebrating and debating their own imminent social order. They will speak of thinking beyond the binary, not consider the possibility of their own opposition, like merely thinking that because they cannot bring themselves to acknowledge a condition that they have rise above this world, they lack the perception of their position always and every day. Those trapped in the world, so world practice and balance up to now through the turning away of the transcendent they violate from, which is presented from the alongside before them in intoxicating compulsion of the ressentiment. They complete it with the refusal of the future taking being towards death. Death is the only future that both you and I can authentically have as individuals happy in their respective opposition. They will indeed be unaware of that they ever sought to address. And the Antichrist is not a doomsday villain, it is a collection of change of deceptive ideas. The one he sees affirms this change of deception by stripping God from our own daily lives and replacing it with the human ego. This destroys any potential for peace because the Antichrist will lead to endless war and violence. Luna Dean in 95, the Antichrist Kaluga and the Dal with the idea of the latter day, which figure would only wreak havoc in the world. The chain of deceptive ideas. We are so indoctrinated in the modern worldview that we seldom pause to ponder on the impact of whether or not had a personal or an institutional relationship in our attitudes toward nature. We must become reconciled with God in order to defeat the Antichrist, a being which exists among us in essence, and the deceptive and destructive ideas at which we created this will come through a process such as our presence and condition about the process the urge to escape the past and generates a desire will avoid something new. If you desire to shift your concern from the self-worship thing so you can begin to find out what your true identity is, the first thing that we must do is take a first step acknowledging the existence of the Almighty God must be reconciled because among God, who removed God suddenly human relationship required a completely different perspective. The vacuum created by non-existence God is sufficiently or suddenly filled by man's ego. Atheism ultimately achieves is not just the death of one God, but it suddenly brings to life a myriad of gods because every conscious being that exists suddenly acquires the role of a God unto himself or itself. Ego, selfishness, and the total commitment to serve one's own ending grows stronger and powerful. There's no external reference point left in the form of beneficent God who is die only by being and only by binding and meeting all the points of creation without returning to one God. One cannot attain peace without peace. Peace in society cannot be built if there is no God. There is no peace in the ultimate wisdom. The attribution of Godhead to the Western self has been a foundation for secularism. It denotes to colonize bodies into a position of non-being. By recentering the heart of the spiritual consciousness, we are able to move away from the ego-centered onto epistemological basis of modernity that has root cause of things like environmental destruction. Cron and 13, the pyramidal construction of man placed together the pyramids represent the logical modernity. At the top, this will help us understand the process of the necessary to create the epistemic geopolitical move, the epistemological decolonization needed to shift from the ego, mass himself in the top center, man's onto epistemological existence, take shift away from Descartes and Western modernity, centering of the human consciousness in the mind, the goal. This requires a shift back to Toswap because the poisonizes itself in the veins of Europe, a genocide of Christians who supremism spread colonization from far reach to the earth that would become further racialized to the epistemological level with the Enlightenment philosophers, replacing the conception of God, that Christian God center is the total is eternal to understanding of the mind and the place of the soul, as what is eternal, the idea of the Western thought is objective and unbiased, as irrational and scientific became the most explicit form of racism that we still live with, us today, epistemological racism that universalizes Western knowledge as applicable to all people in the world, to delegitimizing other forms of knowledge as an attribution, is attribution of the Godhead of the Western self can only because of epistemological, cultural, planetary, ecological destruction, this desacralization of the European self-life words, and the accompanying denied status of knowing being given the colonized bodies of the third world people, the secularity of the society in which we live in must be shared, considerable blaming in the immersion of spiritual powers and traditions. That's the alternative, is black religion. The alternative is a powerful negation of Eurocentric secularism, religion of white supremacy. Any permutation would only serve to domesticate Islam and mollify or make for change Jackson. And 11, belief in the order beyond the world provides Black Americanism with the added installation against the force of American secularism. Being a Muslim would always entail the conscious sense of responsibility toward our commitment to the religion, more specifically religious law. Islam has always been recognized as a negation of false claims of divinity, belief in a commitment of one true God flowing naturally out of this. This is what Islam assumes to be the human challenge. Negation can only be seen not simply by the antithesis of affirmation, but by the necessary and inextricable complement of the latter. This has to be the potential. This has been the potential to slow, not frustrate, not only the process of unwarranted assimilation, domestication of Islam. Perhaps enough time has passed the death of Malcolm X's legacy to reshape the basis of a new Black American Muslim. Radical conservatism, Black American Muslim radical conservatives will not allow us to have, will not allow those who have victimized them undermine their cause by simply charging them with embrace of victimology. Black religion remains an important source of legitimacy. A bridge of broader Black community white supremacy is still alive in America, such as this. There is a place of vigil and holy protest in Black religion. Black religion, for its part, has always been a rich and powerful oversimplification of rejectionist instinct that always serves to enslave from the antithesis force of accommodation, domestication, intellectualism, always trying to mollify rather than address the man now case. Their argument that religion caused violence is causing an indefensible distinction between secular and religious institutions meant to bind us from the violence committed by the nation-state covenant, and 7, it's possible to separate our religious, economic, and political motives in which religious motives are innocent of violence, which is what is implied as conventional wisdom, that religion is prone to violence, and Christianity and Islam are faced are more inclined toward the violence and ideology of the institution identified secular when we in the ways finding comforting ideological use of the myth of religious violence helps us create a blind spot about the violence of the people of the secular nation-state, the Western liberal state, is charged with the burden of creating peace in the face of the cruel religious fanaticism of the Muslim world. Their violence is religious and therefore irrational, diverse. Our violence, on the other hand, is irrational, peacekeeping necessary. Regardlessly, we find ourselves forced to bond in a higher rationality. Now, treating life as a given reduces it to all epistemic investigation, which destroys value life. Cunningham in 2002, the former nihilism discourse complicit with the certain Holocaust is accomplished by placing what is described outside the divine mind, running ontologically neutral, a given rather than a gift. The notion of a given allows for the invention of such neutrality. This is what becomes alienable to the indefinite epistemic investigation laws of countless must be described in neutral terms. Discourse predicated on nothing to which the every entity is reduced. The human is reduced to its genes, while consciousness is reduced to chemical atoms, and so on. All these discourses speak upon disappearance, Holocaust, and ice cream. There can be no difference except for the epistemic difference. Both must be reducible to nothing. The very possibility of modern discord hangs on the structures of being modernity. Being modernity causes all of these described to disappear. Loss of life, so the loss of death is witnessed. A historical loss of 6 million Jews during the Second World War. We see that the National Socialist description of Jews took away from the lives and took away from the deaths. The Jews lost their lives because they have already lost their deaths. And it is this loss of death that allows the Nazis to remove the Jews alive. The life that is lost is always therefore its death, because they who lose their life are already lost in terms of epistemic description. The living are described in the same manner as the dead. Modern discourse cannot discriminate between life and death. Now, metaphysics are inevitable, precedes philosophical inquiry to do, otherwise treats life as a given rather than a gift. Cunningham in 99, any philosophy which treats self rather than metaphysical is said to exemplify an establishment of metaphysics by default. Philosophy renders self intelligible by way of a whole host of metaphysical presuppositions. The hence being is treated as a given rather than opposed to a gift. The theology can offer a form of explanation that will escape the purpose of philosophical explanation. Philosophy would have to reposition itself to theology, deferring to the latter mode of discourse. Now, Derrida is blind to the colonial difference. His advocacy there perpetuates racist geopolitics and modern coloniality. This is modern tourism. Derrida does not interrogate Derrida do not interrogate the ties of quantity imperial mentality at the times in which they were all for common foreign policies beginning in the core of Europe. In a very condescending gesture, Derrida writes, Europeans could learn from the perspective of defeated to perceive themselves as dubious rules of victors who call into account the violence and forceful uprooting for the modernization until figures like Derrida come to terms with the statement. I believe that it will be impossible for them to overcome epistemic racism that continues today throughout the many difference. Instead of challenging the racist geopolitics of knowledge that have become so central to Western discourse, they continue by means of racist geopolitics of knowledge would involve the effective discourse of critique of the roots that inhabits dialogue and the formulation of decolonial non-racist geopolitics. That moment should be more about examining complicity and all patterns of donation and searching for the invisible faces, orthodox alignment with what is persistently conceived as barbarian knowledge. And this colonial power matrix organizes all structures on the basis of race, and racism is globalized to explore that form of racism globally. This cross view in 2011 decolonial perspectives of the South conceptualizing the present world system as a historical structural homogeneous totality of the specific colonial matrix. The matrix initiates an entanglement of multiple homogeneous global hierarchies of social, political, epistemic, economic, spiritual, linguistic, and racial forms of domination, of exploitation of the racial, ethnic, and hierarchy of the European / non-European divide transversely configures that all the other global power structures, race and racism become organizing principles that structure all the multiple hierarchies of the world system. Cheap labor is done by non-European people. Women have a higher status than women of European origin have a higher status of access to resources than men in non-European. European Judeo-Christian patriarchy and European notions of sexuality, epistemology, or spirituality, which globalize and export to the rest of the world through the colonial expansion of hegemonic criteria to racialize, classify, and pathologize the rest of the world population, a hierarchy of superior and inferior races. All right. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the impact of K?
The impact to the K is, we would probably say the metaphysics stuff on K's.
It's also Aristotelian piece of evidence that indicates that coloniality is only possible in a world of the egolatry of
Okay, so the impact is colonialism?
it's
Or
continued
metaphysics?
I think we would say
Racialized colonialism?
racialized violence. Yes.
Okay,
because we say
are you saying that you don't have faith in God to save us from that impact?
I don't. You're what?
Okay, that's fine. How do you know when you've reconciled with God?
How do we know? I think we would probably argue that the affirmation of the alternative, or affirming the alternative is a way to endorse.
Okay, that's not an answer to my question. I asked about the conditions of knowing alt solvency, not whether or not the alt
Just like
solvency. So how can you know what the will of God is?
Just like a question predicated on his existence.
Yeah. Our Jackson piece of evidence indicates how Islam is a crucial step for the Black Americans in order to problematize racialized structures.
Okay.
It's founded on the basis of whiteness. Islam always problematizes notions of the second creator. It is a foundational ethical structure.
So black religion is Islam. Black religion is Islam.
Our Jackson piece of evidence indicates how Christianity failed to be a black religion.
Okay,
black religion.
so yes or no? Is
Islam?
Black religion is Islam.
Jackson
That's for the
says black religion.
so the alt is Islam. So the alt is Islam.
It is black. Which is what?
Okay, do you think?
Yes,
do the tenets of Islam align with? That's fine. What was your argument about Jewish people in your Cunningham evidence?
Oh yeah, our argument in the Cunningham evidence is in a world where we treat life as a given rather than a gift. We just epistemically describe things, right? So
okay, but your evidence is making a bunch of hyperbolic claims about Jewish people that based on the Holocaust that they've already died because they don't have any connection to death.
Right, because there is no transcendent value.
Well, as someone who's Jewish, what if I disagree with that premise?
No, it's not.
Do you get to tell me how life is valued as per the Holocaust?
Yeah, go for it.
That piece of evidence indicates how, by terms of epistemic description, not how the Jews describe themselves, but how they were described.
Yeah.
Okay, but your argument is that epistemic description creates an impact on Jewish subjects.
Yeah,
no. It gives the example of the Holocaust. It doesn't say it destroys.
Well, I'm asking you, if your example's bad and indefensible, why should we care about this piece of Cunningham evidence?
It says life no longer has value in a life of imminence.
Okay.
It's an example. If you have, I don't know what your question is.
All right, I still don't understand this notion of how, why would religion give us any incentive to save the environment on a fallen earth?
Yeah, so I can give an example of things like a tree, right? We look at a tree right now and we describe it as per our Cunningham evidence, where we view it as a tree and then a leaf and then some molecules and atoms and then nothing, right? We say that allowing a form of transcendence and divine value to that tree means that we have we can.
Okay, so by voting for the alt, you're saying trees are not made of atoms.
No, we just
okay, so then why? Okay, so last question: why are transcendence and immanence in dialect? Why do they have to be mutually exclusive?
One rejects the oneness of God and allows for desire-based politics, which we say.
All right.
Yeah, I don't need prep.
You say, yeah, I don't need prep?
I don't need prep.
Okay, so why don't you say, yeah, that's okay.
I'll be less confusing next time with it.
Good.
What's the word? Case, then critique.
Move over there.
Y'all set? Argument that religion is violent is not offense, and it's not a very good answer historically. You haven't analyzed any of the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition, any of the historical instances in which the ideograph of religion is used to justify global violence. Your next argument is a nihilism DA that the 1AC doesn't link to. First of all, the case outweighs. We've created our own evaluations about the world that say that there are particular structures that ought to be done away with, the structures of racism that exist that are embedded in the law. The phantasmic analysis of these kinds of structures is important. That's the piece of 1AC Montero and its highest evidence. You cannot assume the metaphysic without ideographs of man, God, and spirit. The alternative divides them all separately and says that man ought to define himself in relation to the divine, which is exactly how violence is invoked in religion against those who refuse to accept the truth of God. Now, the next argument is the Maldonado evidence. There isn't a link to this Derrida colonialism argument. The 1AC just has one quote from Derrida talking about the pharmacon and how the origin of the word can mean both drug in terms of remedy or poison, which is a deconstruction of the way that the drug becomes an inert substance to itself, but the user is what creates the problem to begin with. Now, the Gospel evidence, I don't understand the link to this argument. There isn't an impact either. The case outweighs. I'll get there on the K. Okay. Alternative selves none of the affirmative. The first is performative politics. They haven't engaged in any kind of performance to demonstrate to you an analysis of rhetoric. The 1AC showing of pieces of government propaganda from the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act produced by Harry Anslinger is an important part of our process of analysis that allows us to reveal the structures and the fissures and the structures of power that lie at the bottom of rhetoric that was originally created to prohibit national and international marijuana usage. Harry Anslinger is the single most important player in that history, and the man who shaped that history is the same man who said that marijuana makes darkies think that they're as good as the white man. Without any kind of analysis of this, you can't possibly say that your alternative solves any of the affirmative. The second is the rhetorical analysis portion. The Visa Montero and Attias evidence says that are taking a part of the rhetoric of the government, of the way that it uses visual propaganda like the Coca-Cola ad and the Moloch ad in order to determine that some people who push dope are peddlers who are trying to take away the good citizens of civil society, while the users of cocaine are classy white children who are just having fun. Now, the history portion of the affirmative is something they can't solve either. The case is a TA to the critique because it glosses over these kind of historical structures, which cedes the minimal amount of control that scholars have to alter the reality that exists around them, which is the piece of Attias evidence. Their argument about appealing to the divine doesn't have any kind of demonstrable solvency, at least as people who exist in an academic sphere. We can create a sort of breakdown of the discourses that exist around us to produce a rhetorical critique that pushes us in the correct direction, i.e. abolishing the kind of prohibitions that exist in the status quo. Now, the affirmative solves the piece of Quran impact evidence. The affirmative critiques the God figure of Western white politics. The ability to say that the white man is the one who is at the center of the ego is exactly what the 1AC is criticizing, that there was one man who decided the entire moral structure of drug use for America for the last 100 years now. There is no link to the 1AC. The 1AC is not anti-religion. We have done nothing to tell you that religion cannot exist in the curriculum. However, you have to create an argument that negates the thesis of the 1AC, which is that the war on drugs is built on lies, and that those lies are at the root of a racist prohibition of marijuana that's rooted in American civil society, and that kind of analysis is necessary. Now, our critique, however, is specific to historical white Catholicism, which is something that you have ignored. The influx of Irish immigrants as part of the underclass who were framed as people who used drugs illegally and were existed outside of civil society is something that the 1AC accounts for, that your analysis is entirely conceded. Now, your impact threshold is low. You have to win 100% of your frame to win spiritual punishment exists. Now, let's talk history. Colonialism has come from a lot of different religions. How is the alternative different? They have to do a lot of work in the block in order to justify to you why any of their understanding of black religion is different from the historical understanding of Catholicism, from modern understandings of Islam. They have to create a lot of offensive characterization, which they